Susan, this is a day today to talk about our workshop, Unleash Your Story. And one of the major headlines, taglines for us is storytelling is a superpower. So I want to talk to you today about a couple of things around storytelling and what it means to unleash your superpower and your storytelling. I'm really curious to hear what is one story, one moment when you in your life realized that you had to take ownership of your own story.
Yeah. So that actually was in the last couple of years in this phase of my life. I always thought that I would be a corporate worker for my entire career, right? I had been in it 30 years, and all of a sudden I was no longer in it. And now what, right? I had defined myself by being the director of internal communications for a global pharmaceutical company. And then one day I was no longer that. And who was I now? We spend most of our time at work. And so I needed to figure out what my new story was. And that is not easy to do. And I decided I had a choice and that I could own my own narrative. And that's what I did. I worked through with friends and with coaches and came up with, who am I now? Right? We don't have to be the same person our entire lives. And we get to define who we are. So that was the moment I realized it's time for me to tell my own story.
Beautiful. A follow-up question comes to my mind when I hear that. What is it for you, the difference to, for example, have a story and owning your own story? What's the step? That's the in
Yeah,
between.
I love that. I love that. So it really comes back to understanding that it's your responsibility to tell your story, right? It's about responsibility. We go through life and so many stories are told about us, or we're told what our story is, whether that's by family members, teachers, right? Um, Managers. And so that's the difference. We all have a story. And one thing I learned over the years is we also all have labels. And even though my labels seem positive, they are dedicated, loyal, committed. Um, those can actually hold us in a box and not allow us to create the new story that we want to create. Because I went from being a very stable corporate worker to risking it and starting my own business, right? And so how can somebody who is sort of dedicated and committed and stable is a label of mine,
Yeah.
become a risk taker and sort of throw all that away, right? And so that's
Yeah.
hard. And it is so freeing when you recognize that you get to tell your own story and you get to create that story for you and how it benefits you.
Beautiful. That reminds me of the time when I left for America. I grew up in Germany, and when I left, I remember that was a moment in my life where I not only owned my story, I also got to reinvent my story. That was a beautiful moment, like when you left corporate and reinvented yourself as a company owner and a risk taker, right? That was my moment when I reinvented myself from this, who am I in Germany, Franconian self of mine, to a brave person that goes to a different country and reinvents herself. And with that, I created a new story for myself.
I love that. And so I want to ask you, that was huge to do that. That had to take a lot of courage, right? And I'm assuming there was some sort of fear involved with making such a huge change. So what would you say to people who say, I'm just too afraid to own my own story, tell it, and live it?
One road when I hear the word fear is always to say, what's the underlying fear? right? If I'm afraid of going to America, right, that might be a fear of criticism, right? It might be like I might fail and then people criticize me. So the underlying fear might be a fear of criticism that I'm afraid of, and then I can question that. Is that really something that I need to be afraid of other people criticizing me? So one tip would be to analyze really that underlying fear of that. And then particularly when it comes to storytelling, owning your story, yes, that is a fear. But look what you're missing out. That would be my second question here. If you do not own your story, somebody else will tell it. And I think we should all be more afraid of somebody else telling our story than us telling our own story. So, one piece of advice, do it scared.
I love that. I love that. And you're right. Other people, when they tell your story, they tend to get it wrong, right? They tend to get it wrong.